Hello and welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan along with Kathryn Peterson. And as we'd like to do each and every Wednesday, we're bringing you an episode with topics that we hope are going to help you, the entrepreneurial spirit, to build a bigger life. And sometimes we focus on personal life, sometimes a little bit on professional, and once in a while we blend those two together. And I think today we get that opportunity to do that with a topic you've no doubt figured out by clicking through our title. We're going to take a look at the drift. And the drift is going to be a narrative that we'll unpack. We'll make sure we define what it is. We'll make sure we give you a glimpse at what it looks like. And most importantly, how to avoid getting caught in the drift. But before I dive right into the topic, I want to welcome my favorite co-host back into the screen. Hello, Kathryn.
Hi, Michael. Good to see you. Great to be here. I'm super excited for this topic because I think it happens to a lot more people than we think. So I want to hear all about the drift.
That's a fair way to set it up. I think most of us, as we'll find out by unpacking this, may start to recognize, oh my gosh, I didn't really know what the drift was until you started talking. And I realized that could be me. I might be in the drift, or I know someone very close to me and it sounds like they're in the drift. So yeah, let's spend some time with this one and see if we can help somebody out.
Okay, great. So tell us, what is this mysterious drift word that we're talking about?
Well, okay, so I'm gonna tie two pieces of information together as best I can. One is where the concept of the drift maybe came from, and then also I want to tie it to my good friend and head coach Daniel Harkavy, because Daniel took this concept that we'll unpack and he shared it in a version of his Living Forward story that he and Michael Hyatt co-authored about 10 years ago. So for those of you out there that have read Living Forward or are familiar with that book, familiar with that concept, it's basically a framework for how and why to develop and design your life plan. And the drift becomes the narrative in the story to which every story needs a protagonist and an antagonist. And the drift becomes the antagonist. It is the ever-present pressure that we all have to deal with, in which we find ourselves from time to time getting off course. So drift, let's put it in the narrative of a nautical term. You know, for those of us that have been in the water, we know what that's like when maybe the wind slows down if you're in a sailboat, or maybe you cut the motor back if you're in a power boat, and you allow nature to somewhat kick in. And there's always a flow to the water. If you're in a river, if you're in a stream, if you're in the ocean, there's a flow. And the drift starts to become present when you realize that if left unchecked, your boat will suddenly start to move quite a bit off. And if you're not familiar with this, you might also notice it when you're at the beach with your kids. There's a thing called the undertow. Have you run into that with the girls when you go down to San Diego?
Hmm. Hmm.
All right, so the undertow is present. We used to coach our kids when they were very little. Like, we'd get to the beach and remind them, hey, as you go out and you play in the water, a couple of things you need to know. One is we always need to see you and you need to see us. But two is, if you find yourself caught in one of these currents, an undertow of some kind, maybe even a riptide, which is a really dramatic version of that, try not to do the thing that your instincts tell you to do, which is to start swimming straight back to the shore. Because what is technically happening with the flow of that water, it has come into the shore already, and it's coming out in a current. So you're basically swimming against the current, which will have the net effect of wearing you out and actually cause you to become further adrift. You actually get further away when that happens. So the key to the drift at the ocean, if you're swimming, is to recognize that you're caught in that riptide, you're stuck in that current, and to get parallel with the beach, not perpendicular, till you get out of that current and then swim in. And so some of us have experienced it on a boat, some of us have experienced it in the water, but the drift is a very real and present thing in our lives. And so I'd like to talk about it a little bit now that we know where it comes from. And my friend Daniel Harkavy, who authored the topic, I'd like to unpack a little bit more about what that might mean for those of us who are at this season of our professional lives that the drift might be present.
So give us an example when someone might start to say, oh, wait, is this the drift in their career and their life? What does that look like for somebody?
All right, let's go personal first. I think for many of us, as we get outside of our college years and start working in our career, we're hungry. right? We want to eat, we want to have a place to live. We might want to get married to someone, and so the work that we do is very motivated by our need for that income and our need for what that provides. And so we've got a lot of ambition, and we fight really hard and we work really hard, but sometimes we're not aiming at certain direction or destination because we're just young. We don't know the difference. And at some point, we have to ask a very normal question of, wait a minute, where is all this work leading toward? Why am I doing all this? What does a better version of me look like? And, from time to time, that gives us an opportunity to orient toward a version of the future. When you and I were drafting a life plan, we might have said, hey, without this, it's kind of like having a compass that doesn't know where true north is. We're working our tails off, but how do we know if we're getting anywhere? So in our personal lives, what we might orient toward is a destination, like finishing college, getting a job, getting married, things that are important to us. And once we've accomplished those, we can sometimes forget to set the next destination. Could be with your health, could be with a relationship, could be with your finances. And once you've failed to set the next destination, you tend to start living life a little more casually, maybe a little more, you play it a little safe, and you start pulling back a little, and you find yourself not really practicing that same ambition that you had maybe earlier in your life. And suddenly things start to drift. And the drift shows up in things like your waistline or in your consumer debt or maybe in the marriage counseling that you now find yourself in, or as a parent, you're, at odds with your kid over something. And nobody sees it coming until they're in the middle of it. And their drift might just be that they didn't have the orientation of, hey, what is the better version of what I'm aiming for next in this area of life? And so they just kind of let life happen. They let life come at them. And just like that boat in the water, you think you're safe because here you're still in the boat until you wake up and realize, oh my gosh, my boat has floated way far away from where I wanted to go. And
Mhm.
that happens in our personal lives all the time. And you don't tend to recognize it until either someone outside of your situation calls it out, or even worse, something really bad happens. Maybe it's not the few pounds you put on, it's the doctor standing over you in the ER who says, sorry to tell you, but we're taking you in. You're going to have bypass surgery today.
Mhm.
And you think, how did it get to this? How did I get here? It usually takes an event or someone who cares about us intersecting us and telling us, hey, I think something's wrong. I think you're in the drift.
So one way I think about the drift is, you're on a, let's say you're on a hike, right? And you slightly adjust, and maybe you get a little bit off the trail. And you're like, oh, if I keep going this way, I'll probably get back on the trail. But it might make those 1% turns. So it's kind of the opposite of, let's say, the books that are like, hey, if you improve by 1% daily, but if you kind of slide 1% daily, all of a sudden, after a few months, you're 90 degrees off of where you meant to go pretty quickly without ever recognizing each of those 1%. So that's kind of what I think of as the drift, and how I can sometimes be like, wow, how did I get on this very odd thing? Oh, I started to look at social media 20 minutes a day, and then 30 minutes a day, and then 35 minutes, and all of a sudden it's like, holy cow, now that's my life. So it's sometimes good to say, okay, what new habits have I picked up that maybe have moved me that 1%, and how do I get them pulled back? So what are some other tools maybe someone can start to recognize for themselves before they end up in the ER, let's say, that, oh my gosh, I'm on that drift?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to jump right out of the gate with a dramatic example like that, but for most of us, we can relate to this because even if we haven't experienced it ourselves, we know someone that we care about that does, and it's a hard thing. And I like your analogy of the hiking trail. It reminds me of one that I've heard with an airline pilot. If you're going to fly
Hmm.
from LA to New York, it turns out that you're going to be directly in the line of your flight, like something like 2% of the flight. The rest of the flight is the autopilot or the real pilot fighting to keep the plane in the direction that it's going, because the nature of wind shear is it's like the drift. It's taking you off course. So if you're not constantly fighting to keep that plane heading the direction that it's going, you'll end up way far away. So your analogy of the hike really resonates because that's true. Kathryn, when I think of ways in which you could keep this in check, one of the things that I love about designing a life plan is it gives us a tool, a filter in which we can run our regular routines through so that when real life is happening and new things are coming along or old things are fading away or the world is changing, situations are changing, you've got a tool that you can run this new version of life through to see, wait a minute, something's changed. And it's an opportunity to catch it. It's kind of like if you go to your doctor on a regular basis for a checkup. You don't have to go to the doctor just because you're sick. You can go to get a baseline, normal, good old fashioned checkup so that when something is going awry, they know where the center
Mhm.
line is. They know where ideal health for you recently was or could be again to help you get back in alignment. So I think that practically speaking, that's one of the reasons I'm such a advocate for life planning and why I've told you I think it's maybe my most powerful business tool. Because, if we want to segue this a little bit from personal into business, I think like we've given in these examples of life, whether we're parenting or whether we're talking money, it's also true in our career. Many times we get into a job that we love the idea of in our 20s and we get really good at it by the time when we're 30s, in our 30s, but then maybe we find ourselves getting really bored in our 40s and we stop reading new books and we stop attending new events and we stop
Mhm.
learning new technologies and we just decide, I think I know everything I need to know about this job. I'm just going to do my job and aim for retirement and hope for the best. But what do you think
Yeah.
happens? Life keeps evolving. The world is still growing with or without you. The drift becomes present, and suddenly you find yourself maybe cutting some corners at work in ways that you wouldn't have cut as a younger person. Maybe your expense report isn't as honoring to your integrity as it once was. Maybe your time clock isn't as honest as it once was. Maybe your lunch breaks go from 30 to 45 minutes to 3 hours and three drinks while you're there. You never know. All because you got bored, because you didn't reorient toward what's next. So what are some of the tools? I think maybe we've just touched on a few, so let's highlight them. I think if we're talking in your life, a life plan is a great tool to evaluate where am I in these areas of life. If we're in your health account, having regular routines at your doctor and your dentist, as mundane as those may sound, are really important. And in your career, yeah, I think having a regular evaluation of who am I becoming as a professional? What are some of my future ambitions? Basically our vision exercise, Kathryn. I think it's a
Mhm.
great way to stay focused on growth. Without it, we're all tempted to start playing safe. And
Mhm.
I think you are a Denver Broncos fan, and I think you would be the first to tell me, yeah, prevent defense is a surefire way to end up losing a football game. And I think it happens in our career as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So because none of us want to end up in the drift, right? I mean, we're talking riptides and ERs, so we definitely don't want to be there.
Mm.
So if all of a sudden we're like, wait, here's where we are. What are maybe some things someone can do to start not only to create that vision, but look at the life plan, but what are some other things maybe to re-energize or kind of at least be able to see the shore? What are some
Yeah.
ideas you have? I have some I'm thinking over too. I'll bring up.
Well, this will be an advertisement for Building Champions, but an event you and I first met at was the Building Champions experience.
Yeah.
And it is literally designed around this dilemma. It's designed to create a change of place and a change of pace in order to drive a change of perspective. And those things happen when we get out of a routine that we're normally in and go to engage in a totally different routine for the very purpose of evaluating, who am I? What do I want? Why do I want it? Where am I going? How fast do I want to get there? And without a change in your routine, it's very difficult to do that sitting at your desk on a normal Tuesday. It's very difficult to do that sitting on your couch at home. those are environments in which you've already developed the drift. So you need a routine, just like we told our kids, you got to get out of the riptide, you got to swim parallel to the beach.
Mhm.
Sometimes a retreat is a great way to break that routine. And then you're likely to be around some other people who are thinking the same way, which can also be inspiring because maybe they have an idea that you didn't think of that helps stimulate some growth toward different opportunities you have to fight the drift, to resist the drift, or even to lift yourself right on out of it. So, yeah, I think that'll be my first example is let's find a meaningful retreat where you can really focus on
Mhm.
the changes that might be helpful to keep you out of the drift.
I was reading something the other day about how they're saying that moving to a new town can be better than therapy because it is a total brain reset, which I thought was it's kind of like taking a retreat, right? It's a temporary movement that you come
Mhm.
back, even if you come back to your life, it just kind of disrupts that brain. So I love that idea. The other thing I thought of too was sometimes just getting around different energy, let's say changing your circle of influence, or, recently we hired someone here and it's, she's almost a little bit of a breath of fresh air. So it's because you're teaching and learning and seeing the excitement in somebody else that can say, oh, yeah, this is super fun. Oh, yeah, I'm seeing it from their perspective. So sometimes just bringing a new person into the fold or changing who you're hanging out with can also, I think, give us a good perspective on, oh, wait a minute, I'm swimming in a different pool than these people, and I need to change my pool.
Yeah, that's a great reminder because I think what if you think about where the drift gets present, it gets present when we get comfortable in our routines and we don't do anything to change those routines. And when I talked about boredom earlier, that's maybe a mental version of it, but there's lots of other applications and there can be somewhat of, relational drift or situational drift and those happen when we're just stuck in a routine. So I think you're really touching on something there, which is make a break in the routine. One of the things Lori and I like to do from time to time is set up camp in a different place for a month. And, we have friends who think that's just nuts. And we have other friends who think that's amazing. And we don't get too worried about impressing either of them. We do it because we like the idea of, like we went to outside of Nashville 2 years ago, we went to San Francisco last year. Hey, let's learn about a new place. Let's learn. And we don't have to, we're not on vacation. I get the beauty of working from a laptop just about anywhere that has a good internet connection, but we change the routine. And so these examples you're bringing up are really good ones, and I hope our audience is maybe lowering the bar enough to say, okay, this isn't like I need a whole new career necessarily. It could be that I just need a change of routine, a change of some friends, a change of some hobbies and habits. Might be time to try some of those things as a means of exploring how to keep yourself away from the drift.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, good. Well, I'm excited we are going to have another episode to kind of lead this series. We'll call it a two session series in the drift about what that looks like at work and especially for mortgage and real estate people. So I think that that'll be another way to focus in on the drift in a different way. So check out that next episode coming up here in a couple weeks. But any other comments or things people should realize about the drift that we want to make sure we touch on?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a different angle to it, Catherine, just as we wrap, which is if you are a person listening to this podcast and you recognize someone you care about that you think, maybe that's it. Maybe they're just in a drift and whatever funk they're in, they need to get the funk out. And it's time to, hit this thing head on and attack it. My first encouragement would be, show them some grace, be thoughtful because it's likely that they got caught in a drift. If that is true for that person you care about, they got caught in that drift in one of two ways. One was, like I said, they had been overly ambitious and they were finally like, I've achieved what I want to achieve. Like, they were trying to find a way to lower the stress. So their intention was good. They just didn't think through the unintended consequence of, I can't stay here. Like, this isn't just a break. I've now fallen into a new way of life that I need to mix it up. So if that's someone you care about, be thoughtful of that. They're not they didn't do something wrong. This isn't like there's nothing to blame for that person. So don't attack them. And, how could you do such a dumb thing? Just show them some love. That could be the case. The other way that they could have fallen into a drift was really like these circumstances we're talking about. Maybe they were coping with some of the stress in their life, and the mechanism in which they choose to manage that stress was helpful in a moment and just not helpful long term. Like many medications we take, they're wonderful to help you in the short term, maybe not so great if you become dependent upon them in the long term. So if this person you love or care about is someone you recognize in the drift, do what most of us would do in back to those situations that we just described. Pretend this is your kid at the beach. Pretend this is your person that you love more than anyone else in the world, who you can see who is suddenly starting to panic as maybe they realize, oh my gosh, I'm adrift and I can't figure out how to get out of this. I'm stuck. Calmly enter the water with them, maybe a little bit further down the beach from them, help direct them out of that flow, and then help bring them back in. I think if you can really show that level of empathy in a scenario like that, you'll find a way to apply it in your very real example with this very real person that you love, because empathy will go a long way in helping them identify the drift and find a way out of it. Don't attack them. They just got caught adrift.
That's a good analogy. I like it. We recently watched a show called Outlast. And at one point, everyone's trying to get to this boat, and they have these homemade boats trying to get to this real boat, like a rowboat. And so they're on these, like, almost like a pieces of plywood with
Oh,
buoys. I mean,
wow.
it's not a boat, right? And sure enough, the current is so strong that one of them kind of blasts right past it. And now they're fighting the current to get back, versus the other guy who's really familiar with the water plays with the current and ends up right at the boat. And he started after, but made it there before because he kind of said, hey, I know the current's going this way. I'm going to see if I can kind of pick up on that and get there first. And that's a good analogy. That's what I was just imagining when you said that. So it's,
Well, I hope your analogy and some of mine are helping someone out there who's listening today, because our only intention of bringing these analogies and examples are to help to get you to recognize that the drift could be present in your life, could be present in someone's life that you care about. And if this episode was helpful to identify and be aware of it, maybe there's some things you could do to lean into it. Maybe there's some things you could do to help that person out of it. And I hope, as you said, if we explore a more specific topic around those of us who get caught in the drift in the housing industry, maybe you'll tune into another episode and you'll look forward to learning more.
great. Well, with that, I'm going to close things out. Thanks so much for joining us today on Building Bigger Lives. You can find us on all the platforms, and also check out Daniel Harkavy's book. We will put a link here in our show notes so that you can check that out as well if you want to read Living Forward for yourself and more about the drift. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to future episodes with you.